everyone. Welcome to the July 2nd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, and this week on the podcast, we are going to look ahead to Saturday's card at Belmont Park featuring the Grade 2 Suburban. The race has attracted two of the most exciting four-year-olds in the country, with Dubai World Cup winner Mystic Guide facing off against Happy Saver, who defeated him in the Jockey Club Gold Cup last year. The others all have ability too, but those are the two main players. We've also got the Perfect Sting featuring the return of the Grade 1 winner Viadera for Chad Brown. Those races look pretty straightforward from the perspective of the favorites having a really solid position, but the three races leading into those that comprise the Pick 5 sequence are really interesting, very competitive, so we'll get into all of that a little bit later in the show. Now, as you know, if you've been listening recently, my usual co-host, Craig Milkowski, he's still out, but I was texting with him earlier in this week, and his recovery is going well, so I'm hoping that he's back soon. But in his absence, I've enjoyed getting the opportunity to talk to some new guests on this podcast, and today I'm happy to welcome in handicapper and morning line maker Nick Tammaro. Nick, how's it going?
I'm doing great, David. Thanks for having me. Very excited about joining you.
Yeah, and as I was saying at the top, these stakes didn't come up that interesting from a wagering standpoint unless you're really trying to take a stand against the favorites. They do look to be pretty formidable in those spots, both those two horses in the Suburban and Viadera in the Perfect Sting. But these three races that lead into those stakes in the Pick 5 sequence, they're all super competitive. I had a really tough time making the morning line for that seventh race, the Claiming Affair. But we're going to start things off by talking about this sixth race, which is the first leg of this Pick 5 sequence at Belmont. It's optional claiming 80,000, non-winners of 2 up, then going a mile on the Widener turf course, and a pretty wide open affair. We've got an entry with Chad Brown and Jorge Abreu for Klarovich Stables. We've also got the recent winner of an allowance race at the non-winners of 1 level, Dreams of Tomorrow, who was pretty impressive last time out. Not really sure where the publics can go between those two options, but definitely some horses coming into this race in nice form.
No question about it. And I mean, the really first decision, in my opinion, you have to make is what you're going to do with this entry. And we've seen Price Talk now disappoint a couple of times, I would say, in 2021 when well backed as part of an entry. Last time with Value Engineering, 2 starts back with Good Governance. And I'm wondering now if Price Talk just hasn't. I guess it's a funny argument, right? Because he kind of has taken a step forward. It's just that it hasn't been significant enough based on speed figures to contend with horses that generally win and run well at this class level. So now he's drawn the outside post, which is no big deal on the Widener, and his partner Principled Stand, I thought was a decidedly mediocre one other than winner on opening day of the Belmont meet. I understand that wiring the field on the Widener really, when the rail is at probably 9 feet or less, is difficult. But this horse set a very slow pace to hold off Red Storm Risen, who Dreams of Tomorrow came back and absolutely clobbered. I think that this entry is probably one worth taking a stand against. I agree with you that Dreams of Tomorrow will be the favorite. That was a huge performance last time. It was kind of an eye-opening effort to me. He's a horse that had always hinted at having pretty serious ability. I know I certainly cursed about him losing that race at Saratoga last year at even money on the dirt because it looked like he was just a layup in there, and I think I needed him for some multi-race bet. But he's definitely found a home on the turf, and I think what you could sort of project from him in terms of improvement for a gradually steady horse like that of this one coming from a barn like that of Shug McGahee, if he moves forward again, he's gonna be very tough for these horses to handle. And the only other horses that I was going to mention, you have Chocolate Bar and Bodie Cream coming out of the same race back on Mother's Day. And, in my opinion, given the way the pace set up in there and the way they were respectively ridden, I'd rather have Chocolate Bar. Bodie Cream's a consistent horse, though, and I understand anybody that kind of wants to gravitate towards him. But I sort of could throw a blanket over both of them and take either one. I'd just rather have Chocolate Bar at a better price.
Yeah, I don't really disagree on your take on the favorites. I ended up going to Price Talk as part of the entry, which I don't usually like to do because, as you said, his price is going to get dragged down by Principled Stand. And I'm not as big of a fan as Principled Stand, though I don't think he's impossible in this race. I mean, I think it's worth noting that allowance win from last time, way early in the meet at Belmont Park, even though the turf was labeled firm that day, that course was probably close to yielding. It was producing extremely slow times. There was some rain prior to the start of the meet. So, I mean, I guess you could make the argument that maybe he didn't love the going that day. I did think that he won the race fairly easily, even though the margin was only a neck. He just looked like a horse that was enjoying himself out there and didn't look like he was ever letting Red Storm Risen by him. Though I agree, Red Storm Risen is not the most talented horse that any of these are going to face at that level. As for Dreams of Tomorrow, yeah, I thought he'd be the slight favorite in this spot, even over the entry. It just seems like he's really taken a step forward for Shug McGahee, which I guess you should never be surprised with from that barn. And since they've changed around his running style, having taken the blinkers off for his last two starts, it just seems like it's given him that finishing kick that he didn't really possess when he was a little more aggressive early in his races. And he did get a perfect trip last time from off the pace. They were going pretty quickly ahead of him and it kind of fell apart. And I didn't think that was the strongest field either, but he earned a competitive speed figure. And it just seems like he's the kind of horse that's moving in the right direction. As for the two Mike Maker horses that you brought up, I mean, I guess I felt like Bodie Cream was supposed to win last time. He did get a little bit shut off in upper stretch when the winner of that race, Sanctuary City, made that sweeping move past him, and Luis Saez looked like he briefly got caught in behind horses and probably might have won that race if he had been able to make the first move. That said, it's not like Bodie Cream is a winning machine. He often settles for minor awards, so I guess that's the concern with him again here. I didn't love either of the Maker runners. I thought that those other two that I mentioned, both Price Talk and Dreams of Tomorrow, were a little more appealing. And just to finish off, Price Talk like glossed over a little bit. I didn't love the ride that he got last time in that race that he's exiting behind Hard Love, the 3-year-old who won at this level. Just seemed like his rider didn't really ride him with, let's say, a ton of urgency that day to kind of get into the clear for the stretch drive. And he is a horse that kind of wants to get into the clear to make that late push. And he had run pretty well against a slow pace prior to that. So I just think Price Talk is a horse that's just a little dirtied up coming out of this last race. And hopefully that's going to negate the negative effects that we get from him being coupled with Principled Stand. Before we move on, there's one other horse that I want to get your take on, and that's Emirati, the other Chad Brown runner in this race. He's a horse that I was trying to make a case for because he was really against it from a pace standpoint last time. I just don't love any of his races that much.
I agree, and it seems like he was a little bit better when we saw him back in 2019. So you wonder if maybe something physical that kept him on the sidelines for so long has continued to kind of dog him a little bit. And I wonder, Chad does a lot with equipment like blinkers, and he's been very effective taking them off and on certain horses. I think he only puts them on the horses that obviously ideally he's trying to do so with the horses that really need it. But I think he's probably trying to get a little bit more positional speed out of this horse, and Manny Franco is one that can certainly ride him a little bit more aggressively early. He's a tough horse to really make a determination on, and I think that's probably why you wanted to talk about him, because his best races will win, but you just wonder if his best races might be well behind him and not really in the realm of possibility in this race.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I thought he was going to go somewhere when he made that U.S. debut all the way back in 2019, and he just kind of never moved forward from that. And the switch to blinkers, it is a little perplexing because it's not a move that Chad has a ton of success with. And this is a horse that naturally gets a little bit rank in his races. So it just seems like a little counterintuitive to add blinkers to a horse like that. But maybe they are looking to change up his running style.
It almost makes you wonder if he might need to be shortened up. He was a sprinter overseas, and I know that a lot of times those horses stretch out effectively in America, but we'll see. This is a horse who could ultimately be a little bit more effective, potentially at 7/8. I think Chad is now getting, I don't want to say desperation, but I think he's getting into things he's starting to throw his hands up if the blinkers are going on, because he's just not produced at what probably was expected so far in 2021.
Yeah, he is a horse that I'm going to throw in somewhere and use because he does have the ability in there somewhere. He's just not a horse I could quite bring myself to pick on top, which is why I landed on Price Talk. Moving on to the seventh race, the second leg of this late pick five sequence. This is a $20,000 claimer going 6.5 furlongs on the dirt. And boy, this is a really tough race to get through. I mean, I guess the outside horse Storm Advisory, if he shows up with his good effort, he's going to be pretty tough for this field to beat. But you really do have to wonder what you're going to get from this horse coming out of the Rob Atras barn, because he just turned into a different horse for Rob Atras, and his prior form for ordinary trainers makes him no kind of standout in this race. So he's a really difficult horse to gauge. And you've got a bunch of other horses in here that are making some trainer switches off the claim, and you wonder if they're going to hold their form.
Yeah, you sort of alluded to it. His form is ordinary for prior trainers. I mean, he's not been as effective, and I think his form is maybe a little dressed up with Atras because he did get a very cozy kind of inside trip back on March 13th before tipping out and winning. But still, he was a much better horse. I mean, right? It's obvious that his speed figures went up a ton, and whether he was helped by the track profile in a couple of those races or not, they were incredible performances based on what we had seen before. I mean, this is a horse that was regularly earning Timeform US speed figures in the 2-digit range, and even in races where he ran very well, he was around 100. He was consistently faster than that with Atris, and you wonder about how he was claimed now a little over 6 weeks ago. Um, that's a little disconcerting. It doesn't give you necessarily the most confidence. And the other problem, of course, is you begin to look through this field and it gets very difficult to take anybody and have any confidence. Strolling is a horse that has now been claimed in 2 straight starts. Orlando Noda took him off of Peter Miller, and now Oscar Barrera is taking him off of Orlando Noda. And with all due respect for Oscar Barrera, who has been actually has had a productive last few months, this is a very hard barn to take horses off of. And even though he's coming back on relatively short rest, it really gives you kind of a cause for pause, in my opinion. I thought, I mean, as you did, obviously, in making a morning line, 8 horses between 7-2 and 8-1. This is an extremely difficult race, and I know he was kind of a surprising winner 2 starts back. I like the setup on Joyce. He has pizzazz cutting back in distance, obviously not facing weaker company than he did last time. The starter allowance race is heavily restricted, but I thought that he might get the right trip stalking on the outside, ready to pounce late. I will admit it was a race I had very little clue in.
Yeah, I mean, Joyce has pizzazz, I guess, is the horse that you would look to if you're trying to make a case for Strolling, because he also was claimed away from the Orlando Noda barn, run back in 2 weeks, which is the exact same profile for Strolling. And the new barn, Ed Delora, was actually able to get him to run a similar, maybe even better performance off the claim away from Noda. Things did kind of fall apart last time for Joyce has pizzazz, which makes me wonder a little bit about whether this new barn is going to be able to hold his form together. And watching that race two back, it just I didn't know what to make of it. It almost seemed like the horse was trying to run away from Luis Saez for the entire race. It was kind of an ugly one to watch. It was not visually impressive at all, but it came back a fast race and got a pretty nice speed figure. So I didn't know what to do with that horse. And similarly, I didn't know what to do with Strolling in this race. Ultimately, I decided to go away from all of these horses that are coming out of these kind of barns that have really improved horses like Atris and Noda. So I wanted to go in a different direction, and I landed on Al Cools, who is going to have to deal with the number 2 Vineyard Sound on the front end. But Al Cools has shown the ability to rate in the past and stalk another horse. I just thought he was in the wrong situation last time, going a mile against a pretty decent field for that 25 level with horses like Mubermaj and Legit in there. He was stalking an honest pace, actually setting it and faded. I thought he ran decently behind Joyce. He has Pizzazz 2 back. He showed that he could stalk 3 back in California. So I haven't loved the way that these Peter Miller horses have run in general in New York, but this one seems like he's held his form reasonably well. And I just thought he would get a pretty good trip in here and might be a decent price somewhere in that 4 to 6 to 1 range, not really having a strong conviction about how they're going to bet this race. But he was where I landed. But like you said, it's one where you can make a case for a lot of horses.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, the concerns that you mentioned are very significant with regards to Joyce has pizzazz, because you're wondering, basically to put it plainly, with Eddie DeLauro ran this horse on May 28th on Orlando Nota's training, and it feels like that's a strong possibility. You it made a great case for Al Cools, who I think actually makes a lot of sense, and Mubermaj, who wired the race he came out of last time, is a solid former higher level competitor who's was working his way down the claiming ladder, and an easy shot was also taken for 50,000 back in the spring. So those were probably much better horses than what he's facing this time around. You're going to get an excellent price there too, I think, at 6 to 1 or so. And this feels like the right kind of horse on the cutback. And Peter Miller's horses, I'm sure they're going to get going at some point, right? We've been waiting, but I thought that he was one that I certainly could make a strong case for winning. I thought the same kind of cause of action, even though he's coming back off a layoff. He ran races over the winter that would make him competitive. We'll see if he can duplicate that kind of form. It's not always been the easiest thing for him to keep going, and the time away is a little disconcerting. But yeah, I mean, we're getting close to having talked about all 8 of them, and I think we certainly could make reasonable cases.
Yeah, I agree about cause of action as well. I actually picked him second in this race. I agree. If he just gets back to his races from the winter when we last saw him, he's going to be competitive in here. I think it just remains to be seen whether he could hold that form and if he's going to get the pace that he needs. Because of all the horses in this race, he's probably one of the few that really is dependent on how quickly they go up front.
Yes, no question about it. He's going to need things to heat up, and being on the rail and having Joel Rosario, you do become concerned with how much ground he might give up.
Moving back to the turf for the middle leg of this pick five sequence, race eight, and I'm hoping we are on the turf on Saturday. I didn't mention it at the top, but there is plenty of rain predicted in the forecast over the next couple of days in New York. So we'll see. I know we're off the turf for a few races on Friday when we're recording this, but hopefully the Saturday card at least stays intact for this late pick five sequence. But race eight, it's on the inner turf going a mile and a 16th, non-winners of one other than for the 3-year-olds. And another pretty competitive race, though I do think you're going to have a solid favorite in the number 7 Space Launch for Christophe Clement, who just really hasn't done much wrong in 3 starts. He was pretty impressive winning his debut over Scarlet Sky, who's turned out to be pretty good. And since then, he's actually faced some really nice fields in both starts against winners. He caught that boggy turf course in the Awad last year, and his return, Safe Conduct and Public Sector, they both look like they're going to be stakes winners before too long. The 2 horses that beat him in the nominators of one allowance race last time. So I just think he makes a lot of sense in here. But when you get beyond him, there are a lot of horses to potentially consider.
There are, and I mean, I think that probably the most interesting horse in the race is Wolfie's Dynaghost, who, we marveled last fall at him breaking his maiden on debut at Aqueduct, because he was one who it was very easy to casually dismiss him debuting in a sprint race on the dirt, because of course he has a giant pedigree for turf. And as you mentioned in writing up the closer look, he's obviously a half to Sadler's Joy. There's a couple of other winners in the family. You obviously, I'm a little disappointed that they're going to turf this quickly. I think that running him in the Peter Pan off the layoff was, well, in retrospect, it was a mistake. But obviously, he wasn't ready to go a mile and an eighth off the bench, but now he's able to get Lasix. Who knows? He could have bled last time, and he really looks like, if he's not the controlling speed from the inside, I know he'll have to deal with restored order, but I mean, I think Saez generally in this kind of scenario rides with a lot of intent, and you would imagine this horse is going to improve on the turf. It would be very hard to believe he won't. I agree with you as far as Space Launch being the deserving favorite. I thought he ran okay last time. I mean, he didn't run great. Likely needed a race off the layoff, and even though Christophe Clement horses generally are prepared off the bench, but he seems to make perfect sense. There's no reason to be against him. I thought Mirror Mission ran very well to be second to Public Sector last time. And of course, Public Sector and Safe Conduct, who you mentioned, I think are both on the list for, well, no, Public Sector is actually not on the list for the Belmont Derby, I believe. But those horses will be in stakes races certainly pretty soon. So, yeah, I mean, I was mainly just going to use Space Launch and Wolfie's Dynaghost, and maybe try and get a little cute on some tickets and get more aggressive with Wolfie's Dynaghost, kind of taking the bait. And I'll admit that I'm kind of a fish in this respect, and hoping that he improves on the turf.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of this Sadler's Joy family. I really struggled with what to do with Wolfie's Dynaghost in this race, and I ended up going against him. I remember, and I don't want to put too much stock in this stuff, these observations from long ago, but I remember watching, the America's Day at the Races coverage when he made his debut, and I thought it was so bizarre that, Naira's paddock analyst Maggie Wolfendale was making a push for this horse that day because she didn't think he looked like the rest of the family. She thought he looked like a dirt horse, and that kind of is stuck in my mind, which makes me a little bit curious about why they're going to turf now. Like you said, it seems a little bit premature given how well he ran in his debut. And I think the bottom line with this horse is something happened after the debut, because this looked like a horse that could be on the Triple Crown trail. And something obviously kept him away from the races for so long. And I think you have to wonder, before you even get into the conversation of what surface does he prefer, is can this horse still run anymore? And I think based on the performance last time, we're not really sure about that. So, I mean, I don't think he's going to be the favorite in this race. He'll probably be somewhere in that, 5 to 8 to 1 range. So I don't mind taking a shot with him at that price. I just ended up defaulting to some other horses instead. I have no problem with the horse that you mentioned, Mirror Mission. I agree. He ran pretty well last time behind Public Sector, who looks like he could be the favorite on Sunday in the Manila Stakes at Belmont Park. And he was kind of compromised by the slow pace of that safe conduct race two back. So I do think Mira Mission has some ability, but I ended up going to a different horse out of that public sector race from Belmont Stakes week, and that's the number one Mooncod, who's actually drawn all the way on the outside, which is not a great post position for this distance on the inner turf. But I thought Mooncod ran a lot better than it seems last time in that public sector race. He was just caught outside the entire way. That was a time when the rails were down on the turf course, and you did not want to be in that position getting caught 4 or 5 wide around the far turn. And he was just didn't have any cover, always out of position, and still finished up decently that day, all things considered. He's not a horse that I had much of an affinity for early in his career, but it seems like he's one of these Pletcher horses that has actually come around slowly. And his maiden when a Gulfstream two back was actually pretty nice. He didn't settle that day and still produced a nice late finish. So seems like a horse that might still have some improvement in him. And I'm just hoping that he gets a better trip this time.
Yeah, it seems like a perfectly reasonable case, and he certainly has improved since getting to the turf. Which when Todd Pletcher moves him to the turf, it's not always simply because they can't run on the dirt. It might be because they will prefer the turf, and this one looks to be of that type. And I would say that his stablemate Restored Order should probably ensure that there's at least a decent early clip, and we'll see how much pressure he puts on Wolfie's Dynagos. So it looks like an honestly run race. I guess what I would wonder about as far as Wolfie's Dynagos goes is that they're gonna be hard pressed to get a one other than on dirt for straight threes, and this is a straight 3-year-old one other than on turf. And so I wonder if the age restriction and the ability for him to be treated with Lasix was a contributing factor, because I remember Maggie saying the same thing about him prior to that debut. I also remember getting some information from a clocker who had seen him up at Saratoga that he could really run on the dirt. So yeah, it's a little it's very interesting. He's probably one of the more interesting horses to me on the card as far as what he's going to offer up, because you look back through that field that he beat in the debut, and it's like, man, I mean, really love to see him get another try on the dirt. He beat a very solid bunch. Granted, it was kind of a merry-go-round, but still, it feels a little like we're being left out a little bit. So we'll see if the turf, maybe if the grass is greener, so to speak, because he's getting his chance.
Moving on to the two stakes races that close out this sequence. And before we get to the Suburban, we'll talk about the Perfect Sting, the penultimate leg of this sequence. This one is going a mile on the Widener turf for the fillies and mares. And, depending on how the weather works out, this does feel like one that could potentially fall apart a little bit with scratches. I know that a bunch of horses in this race are cross-entered in a stakes race at Parks early next week. And I know that the connections of those horses are closely monitoring the weather to see where they ultimately decide to run. It does feel like Viadera is going to run here, whether the turf is firm or towards the soft side. She seems like one that can handle different kinds of going. And she's just way the horse to beat from a class and speed figure standpoint. She just kept getting better last year for Chad Brown, and she did get very good trips from Joel Rosario in her last two victories, both at the hands of her stablemate Blowout. But that said, I mean, she was beating horses that are just better than the ones that she's meeting here. So if she comes back in top form, she's going to be really tough for this field to beat.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and she's probably a horse that smart ass like me would love to be able to bet against, because she's one of those horses I guess the best way to describe her is that, I mean, she obviously has a nose for the wire, right? She was up in time, three straight races, was not anywhere near best in any of them, and just was able to get it done just in time. And you would love to have taken a chance against her in a tough race, and this is just not a tough race, right? It's a race that she's supposed to win regardless of who ends up showing up. And again, it could end up being a very, very small field with you mentioned Medita. I believe Medita and Sunset Kiss are both entered at Parks. So yeah, this could be a very, very short bunch, and it would probably just put her in position where she's going to sit on top of Princess Grace and Piedi Bianchi and Pounce When Ready, and that's probably all she wrote. I don't really see an alternative other than if you really want to dig into Honeycake's form. And the interesting thing to me, and I was going to ask you about this in looking at the race, obviously having less than firm turf is going to help a horse like Honeycake, because even though they may have been, at least the Qatar Prix du Pin was probably, but her two worst races overseas were on firm turf. So it's generally, to me, now that horses that are going to run in stakes races in America are not treated with Lasix, the majority of the horses, in my opinion, and I hate to just make a generalization, but as I was told by a European once, they come over here looking for firm turf. And this is a horse that they probably weren't looking for firm turf with, and they're not getting Lasix. So I'm interested to see what Honey Cake does. It's not as if Jonathan Thomas has really excelled with a lot of these ship-ins. And, let's be honest, she has a pretty tough assignment on her hands trying to beat Viadera.
Yeah, and in addition to the initial reporting about who was going to enter that race at Parks, Honey Cake and Princess Grace actually did enter the race. Their connections decided late, so we'll see who ends up running at Belmont on Saturday, because we could have a few scratches if this race does stay on the turf. But I mean, as for Honey Cake, I think you make a good point about her probably being fine over some turf with given the ground, given how well she ran in Europe. I watched that last race at Fontainebleau, and I mean, it was clearly was of course with a lot of give to it. They were kicking up some big clods, and she seemed to just really sail through it, whereas some others were struggling and off the bridle a long way out. She traveled well the entire way. She does appear to be a horse that has plenty of tactical speed. She can actually make all the running on the front end. So that's not a concern that she should get a good trip in this race being forwardly placed. Jonathan Thomas, I was reading his quotes coming in here. He kind of alluded to the fact that he probably has her a few works short. He said he doesn't mind running these European shippers short a little bit. He's not one that, is just sort of looking to win with them first time out. I watched her recent workout on XBTV, and she just seemed like a horse that didn't quite have it all together yet. She was really headstrong, fighting the rider quite a bit, just didn't seem to be in the best headspace. So I wonder what we're going to get from her in her U.S. debut. She's one that I'll be watching closely, though, for next time. And Princess Grace, I mean, just seems like a horse that is going to have to take a big step forward if she's going to get on terms of the Adara. I thought that she was promising last year. She ran well given the pace situation in the Valley View 2 back, but she's just going to have to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe the, you know, abbreviated field that she stands to face will help. But yeah, if Viadera shows up, whoever is left in this field is going to have to really do some running to knock her off.
Let's close things out with the feature race on Saturday, which is the final race on the card. Race 10, the Grade 2 Suburban, going a mile and a quarter on that main track oval at Belmont Park. And we've got the two protagonists in this race, the Dubai World Cup winner, Mystic Guide, and the Jockey Club Gold Cup winner, Happy Saver, facing off again after Happy Saver beat Mystic Guide in that Jockey Club last year. I mean, I think the story coming into this race is clearly Mystic Guide has taken a step forward from his 3-year-old season. And the question for Happy Saver is, has he as well? I don't think we really have the answer based on his allowance win, but he obviously is a horse that can take a step forward off that.
Yeah, right. I mean, and to use a kind of a bad analogy or a bad saying, to be the man, you got to beat the man, right? And the man last year was Happy Saver, but now it's clearly Mystic Guide, who I don't know if you've been surprised, but I've been pretty surprised by how much he moved forward. I wanted to attribute the Razorback win to the sloppy track, but he came back in Dubai, and you never really know what he's beating from top to bottom because we know which horses were in it from America, and we don't really know much about some of the overseas based horses and how they shipped and things like that. But he was very authoritative in victory, and this has been the target for quite some time. So I think it seems safe to assume he's gonna bring forward his very best. And now that we've seen that Mystic Guide is capable of elevating his game, it's really incumbent upon Happy Saver to prove the same thing. And Happy Saver showed in a brief run as a 3-year-old that he's a horse with a tremendous amount of talent. I thought his comeback race was about what he needed. It was not supposed to dazzle anybody, and it didn't. It was a workmanlike win over an inferior field, but it was. I would imagine that afterwards, Todd Pletcher felt like it served its purpose because he needed to get a race into him. He needed to give him a foundation to go along with those workouts to be able to contest a race like the Suburban. I think it's going to be an interesting jockeys race, no question about it, because I think that Luis Saez is going to be on a mission to get Mystic Guide to the outside, to that comfortable stalking spot as quickly as he can. And I think Irad's goal is going to be to keep him from doing so by probably positioning Happy Saver right off of Moretti's flank. I would love for them to be a little bit more aggressive with Happy Saver and just go to the lead and attempt to dictate terms to everybody. I think that, especially when you're talking about a horse with the kind of talent that he has, there's never any harm in being on the lead. So I could see that maybe as a viable approach. But either way, it's a fascinating showdown. I'm going to pick Happy Saver because he's going to be a better price. I think that you pretty much nailed it in terms of prices. I think there's probably a chance that Mystic Guy takes a little bit more money, but it is going to factor in with everybody when they start look. I feel like this is a race where if you use social media as a barometer, you think, oh gosh, I mean, Mystic Guide has basically been coronated, and then everybody looks at the PPs and realizes, well, Happy Saver beat Mystic Guide on the square. And even though Mystic Guide has come back with two very strong performances in 2021, it's there's really not a big disparity between the two at all. I'm gonna hope that Happy Saver is capable of taking that step forward too, because we could really have a fun matchup between these two handicap horses as 2021 goes on.
Yeah, I agree with almost all of that. I mean, I was a big fan of Mystic Guide throughout last year, so I don't want to say that I was that surprised by his improvement. I wasn't surprised a little bit by how suddenly he improved in the Razorback from his 3-year-old form. I mean, he's a horse that has just kind of progressively gotten better with every start, but he took a big step forward in that seasonal debut at Oaklawn. I mean, it is worth remembering he got a great trip that day over a course that seemed to be favoring horses that were outside, and that all went his way. So that does help you a little bit when you're running the best speed figure of your career. And, the Dubai World Cup, I mean, he looked great. I don't know what to make of that race from a class standpoint because you just don't really have a gauge on how good the other dirt horses in that field were. But clearly, I think he has taken a step forward from last year. And like you said, Happy Saver's got to match him. The tactics are going to be interesting. Arad Ortiz has kind of said coming into this race that he does believe Happy Saver is better with a target. So I think it's unlikely that they would be too aggressive with him. The connections kind of think he's a horse that doesn't really want to run away from horses and needs to make that move on the stretch. And we saw a little bit of that last time when he didn't go clear of that field maybe the way that you would have thought he would, that allowance company in the stretch last time. And once Arad Ortiz kind of dropped his hands coming to the wire, the horse really shut down quickly. So, I mean, he's a horse that definitely is attuned to the rider's cues, Happy Saver. So, I mean, you'll probably get that kind of trip from him stalking Mystic Guide. And we'll just see which one's good enough. I'm going to go to Mystic Guide. I would imagine there'll be similar prices. Maybe Mystic Guide drops down to 4 to 5, Happy Saver 7 to 5. We'll see how close they ultimately are. But I do think Mystic Guide is the more likely winner of this race. And I had trouble making a case for anybody else. I mean, Max Player was a little bit against the track last time, the Pimlico Special, but he's just never really taken that step forward that you would have wanted to see.
Right. He's a horse I think he's definitely been more hype than substance. And really, it's kind of amazing to me. He's still eligible for 3 lifetime, contested a lot of tough races since then. Yeah, I mean the Dubai conversation is tricky, right? Because I mean Magny Cour, who ran third, has come back and lost 3 straight turf races. But again, he was interesting that night because he was kind of bred for dirt and was getting that opportunity. In the balance of the field, the American contingent was definitely on the weaker side, but it's almost irrelevant because of the way Mystic Guide won the race. And I don't want to get into the nebulous conversation about, oh, he didn't really beat much, but he beat him like a drum, right? He beat who lined up, and he ran his race, which is to me is the most important thing. So yeah, I'm fascinated by it. I even entertained this slight possibility in looking through the field of, okay, who could be the upsetter, and they're really, to me, it's going to be very shocking if one of these two gets beat. I can't even really envision a scenario. I know Informative won last time out at 80 to 1, and he looks like he could be about 80 to 1 again. But it's going to be, yes, it would be very hard to figure. I mean, I guess just talking about that for a second, I guess Max Player taking that big step off the wide trip at Pimlico could do it. But I feel like Happy Saver and Mystic Guide will probably hopefully engage in a nice little showdown, and we'll see if Mystic Guide ends up producing the type of efforts that we saw. I mean, what a hand Godolphin has between him and Maxfield and Essential Quality. When you're talking about one owner potentially having the 3 favorites in a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, obviously there's a long way to go between now and then, but all those horses seem very well positioned at this point. So definitely exciting times for that stable. And like you, I'm really looking forward to this race. I hope that both of them show up. I hope that Happy Saver does take that step forward, and we get to see which one is developed better as a 4-year-old. I'm giving the nod to Mystic Guy, but I'm hoping it's a good race between these two. And just from a pick 5 sequence as we wrap this up, I mean, it feels like it's hard to go against the favorites in these races. I think it's one where you might want to spread a little bit in those first 3 legs. I mean, I think for me, that 7th race is one where I'd probably have to use a few horses to go a little bit deeper as backups beyond just the horse that I picked, Al Cools. But definitely one where you can spread a little bit early and maybe get down to thin your ticket out for these stakes races later.
Yeah, that's going to be my approach as well, trying to cast a wide net early just to get basically to Viadera into the 2 favorites in the last, and probably be one that you have to hit a few times just to make up for it because it's going to be chalky in those last couple of legs. But I mean, I think if you can get the difficult claiming race that we discussed in race 7 down to, 2 or 3 main horses, and probably end up using the balance of the field in some capacity. And then that gets you to the turf optional claimer, where I'm going to mainly use Wolfie's 9 to go space launch and probably a little bit of mirror mission, and that'll get you into the stake. So that'll kind of be my approach, and it feels like it's a very front loaded sequence in terms of creating value and having interesting betting events before those two stakes.
Well, Nick, I really appreciate you coming on today and talking about this Pick 5 sequence with me. Before I let you go, just tell people where they can find your analysis and follow you.
Yeah, Twitter is NTAMM1215. My Naira analysis is available on inthemoneypodcast.com. And actually, right now, the next couple of weeks, you can hear me calling the races at Sam Houston, the quarter horse races at night, Wednesday, Thursday, and Fridays. But as far as Naira goes, that's probably what everybody's a little bit more interested in. That's where it'll be. And I usually post a play of the day video on YouTube and put it there. And so I'll be there every Saratoga racing day. And I'm looking forward to these last couple of weeks at Belmont and then getting things started ready for the spa.
Great stuff. Sounds good. Again, thanks to Nick for coming on the podcast today. Remember that you can always listen to these Timeform US podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, everybody, thanks for listening this week. I haven't yet decided how many podcasts I'm going to do next week with that abbreviated week after we have that Monday holiday. So I'll put something out on Twitter about that, but look forward to at least one podcast next week. Everybody, thanks for listening and stay tuned for that Timeform US podcast coming up next week.